I mean, at this point, if I weren't so right about Gyasi Zardes, Phil, everyone would accuse the publication of being unfairly biased in favor of him. But he's out there performing, as I say that he does. When you give the man service, the chef plates up the meal. That's what I'm saying in a broken culinary metaphor, but I'm saying it all the same. Verde all day was right about Gyasi Zardes. Look what happens when the man is given the tools that he needs.
I was questioning his ability to go 90 minutes, questioning his ability to score. Certainly, he played the full 90 minutes. He scored not one, but two goals. There were two good essential goals. I think his first goals in nearly a year. So good to see. And NYCFC vanquished, another three home points, could be critical towards the end of the season. I was actually not at the game, a rare occurrence, but as listeners know, in New Orleans, my mom's 80th birthday, that went great. She had a really good time. I ate, of course, way too much rich food, which is usually the case whenever I go to New Orleans. And yeah, definitely indulged, and it was fantastic. And
I need to get some New Orleans tips from you because I'm heading through there in a
Mhm.
couple weeks. Anytime I'm driving the Texas to Florida gateway, I never miss an
Mm.
opportunity to stop in New Orleans. Seriously, I think my favorite city in the United States that I don't live in.
Yeah, it's a good plan. You should actually not carry on to Florida. You should just stop in New
Should
Orleans
just
and stay there.
yeah, no, I should not. I should just stay in New Orleans, eat well, enjoy the smells of the bay, and just hang out.
There were definitely some garbage wafting smells
Yeah,
that I got during
that's
my time in New
that's the
Orleans, but
that's the only downside, but all the upsides
mhm.
more than make up for it. I One other thing before we hop off as artists is that as every time I say something optimistic, something in some cases defensive about Gyasi Zardes, people have said, "Oh, he's so slow and he just moves around like he's got lead in his boots," and people make to me uncomfortable animal metaphors.
Hmm,
Anytime people are comparing a black player to a mammal that isn't a human being,
that's not
that
good.
raises my hackles. And I get that people don't immediately clock it as being problematic, but
But it is.
when you're not comparing other non-black players to animals as well, maybe consider some of your inborn ways of communicating. Zardes, they put the stat up on the screen during the match, had covered more ground than any player on either team the entire time. Now, was he sprinting the whole time? No. Should you be sprinting the entire time if you're going the full 90 in a soccer match? I don't know that you should. When he needs to be in the right place at the right time, he gets in the rightest place that he can be at the right time. But if he's not getting the service that he needs from the wings, that's just not going to happen. And I think the limited amount of footage that we saw of Usman sending it into him in practice is any indication. I have a feeling that people are going to start changing their tune a bit on Gyasi Zardes when you have a world class winger sending stuff into him that he knows how to talk to.
You don't necessarily need to sprint to cover ground,
No,
and he does do work as a defensive forward. Like, that is something that's in his wheelhouse. That is something that he does, and certainly he does show up right place, right time. That gets us into a whole bunch of interesting questions. We are going to ponder the Sounders lately. We are going to purely talk soccer at points in this. At points, of course, we are not, because we are us. But just thinking about, does Austin go with Zardes or Rubio, who will now be available again? Or is there some kind of world in which both of them somehow get in the field? Does that maybe make some sort of sense in ways that certainly there's been a little lineup tinkering, not a lot this year, but certainly maybe there's some planning that can take place to get them both and to take advantage of the things that they can do.
we will see. So, Phil, I think we need to issue a challenge to the Verde All Day Nation. Give us other ways in which Gyasi Zardes will prove people wrong. Doesn't have to be about soccer. It can be about his ability to perfectly flip a pancake. It can
Mhm.
be about his ability to always pick the kids up from school on time. Any number of things that people
Not
could
just
have
his
been wrong
kids,
about. Not just his kids, any other people's kids.
everybody's kids.
As we
Yeah.
know, every player on this team deserves an opportunity to lift a random baby from the crowd into the air, whether it is
Mhm.
theirs or not. So I feel like we need to start getting creative because he's covering ground, he's scoring goals and winning games. There have got to be other ways in which people have been wrong about Gyasi Zardes the whole time. And look, maybe I will end up being proven wrong, but if anything, it feels to me like Gyasi Zardes is just proving me right time after time. Maybe I'm trolling. Maybe it's the truth. Maybe it's a little both. Who knows? It infuriates some people, that much I'm sure of.
Okay. So Sardis, make 85-degree August days happen.
Okay. All right. I think that goes on the list.
Emergency podcast. Verde did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, oh yeah, shut up, oh yeah, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, a hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the Austin FC podcast, where we talk about all the emergencies that happen to Austin FC or to U.S. national team fans who are suddenly looking for a new head coach. I know that there are probably some Austin fans that wish that Austin FC was looking for a new head coach. Not the case, but Josh Wolff's mentor, of course, Gregg Berhalter, on his way out. That's certainly something that's on our minds this week. Also on our minds this week, we have two games to talk about between now and next Friday, a day that I'm very excited about because it is the first day after the summer transfer window opens, and it is the day before we may get to see Osman Bukari and Mikel Desler play the first minutes with Austin FC. Of course, Alexander Svatok, who is also a summer signing, but is not in camp yet. But we do have some reports, Bukari, Desler in camp. We're going to talk about that. We're going to ponder Berhalter's future. We're going to talk about Copa Tejas being decided. Lots going on in what is a strangely weird and quiet week, even though we're about to start 3 games in 8 days. Moisés Chiullán, you are with me once again. How are you doing? And how was Q2 Stadium without me on Saturday?
I'm good. It felt a little empty. I got to be honest. It felt a little weird, a little off when they went to ask who was going to ask the first question of the post-game press conference. I did not immediately get it from sitting in the Phil West seat, partly because I wasn't sitting in the front row because I was hustling to get at the whistle written. There were notes from noted enemy of the show, Chase Hoffman, that it was only a 2-minute read. It was far too breezy and quick. I felt it was very efficient, got everything done and to the point, and said what needed to be said, and was incredible work par excellence, as is my standard. But Chase and I can debate that in other
Wait, did you call Chase an enemy of the show?
I did. He's a known enemy of the show. He's
Chase,
a friend.
Chase is great.
He's great. He's a friend of the show who's an enemy of the show only when I'm gently trolling him in a friendly way. Yeah, hustling to get that done. Eric Goodman made sure to mention to me, make sure to change the headline. And I was like, that's the last thing I do every time, Eric. That's the way that I don't mess it up. Not my first time blogging, bud, but thanks for the tip. I appreciate it. So yeah, I was late getting downstairs, so I didn't occupy the Phil West chair right in the front corner. The nice fellow from the Statesman who was not aware that Diego Rubio was not available for selection that night and said that Diego Rubio was the player to watch for the game in his match preview write-up.
This was not
Colby. It was not Colby, to be clear. It was not Colby. It was his good buddy from the Statesman who did him a solid and filled in for him, but who the Austin FC fan base was quick to go, who is this guy and why does he not know who is on yellow card suspension? But yeah,
how dare he?
Yeah, he took the Phil West seat. Frankly, he should be brought up on charges for this. Doesn't he know the sainted Phil West seat? That is a magical place, a seat of honor. So it's my fault that I wasn't guarding it and that somebody else swooped in and stole it. But it'll be back on you this Saturday. Right. Yeah, it was an interesting night. I think the energy of the crowd was there with them despite the early goal from NYC. And it stayed consistent throughout the match. And it really, I feel like the fans deserve a lot of credit for sticking with the team after what looked like the beginning of a story that we've seen so many times this season of going down early.
I had an eye on it, by the way. I was actually playing bingo with my family and doing some other things, but I had my phone up, had my eye on it, couldn't entirely get away from Austin FC. And yeah, there was that 5th-minute goal. That was a worrying moment. That was oh, look what the defense didn't do. And to Austin's credit, got an equalizer and then got a game winner. They've done that before. They've come from behind before. Certainly good to see that happen again. And again, the aforementioned Gyasi Zardes gets goals 104 and 105 in his MLS career. Very nice to see. You got to go to the media availability on Thursday, and among other topics, and we'll talk about the other topics they talked about a little bit later in the show, but just thinking about Bukari and how he is progressing, and Josh had some encouraging things to say, and Zardes, who was the player picked, also had some encouraging things to say. So let's get into that and fantasize about what might happen on the 20th when Bukari gets to, if not start, at least play.
I'll say this, Josh Wolff, not an Academy Award-winning actor. He wears his emotional reactions on his sleeve. You pick up Josh Wolff's stank face from a mile away. I noticed that just at the mention of Osman Bukari's name, a smile of optimism and joy that I'm not used to from Josh Wolff. It looked like he was just at the speaking of the man's name, it was like angels sang. That to me signaled in Josh Wolff parlance, I got exactly what I was hoping to get with this guy. That is encouraging, despite what any people, myself included, might say about Josh. I think that's a good sign. I think that is an indicator that he is, in fact, working into the rotation really well. He made mention of, in the style of Brendan Hines-Ike, who came late to camp, mention of Dessler not having played in a few weeks and needing some more time and that sort of thing. So there's that balance. I asked him about Svatok. He said paperwork. So it looks like it's still going to be a bit before we get his visa sorted out and get him in here. But even if just one point of that trident is looking especially gleaming and sharp in the summer sun, I think that's a good indication as we head toward that Charlotte game. That was the thing that I would pick out as most immediately notable among a lot of canned answers that we've heard 70 times before.
Dessler also went and got married. So that's another thing that he did that was not getting ready for soccer. So that's something, right? He did mention that, right?
Yeah, I believe so. And when we did the Dessler welcome event, Dessler mentioned that his top priority now is to get his wife into the country. Yeah, I would say that's a pretty good set of priorities to have there, my friend.
Yep, that's the thing you want to do. Yeah. One of the things that Josh said about Bukari that I was really excited about was that from a standstill, he was behind his opponent within 10 yards. And that to me is very encouraging, right? That he's able to go from 0 to beating his opponent in the space of 10 yards. That's good. That's encouraging. I do, of course, wonder about just his ability to connect with players. I don't know if he's going to be looking to get a shot versus looking to get assists and working with the system. I know that Josh was saying that they didn't want to hit Bukari with a lot in the first week, that they took him to the Kansas City game just to get a feel of things. So I guess just to get a feel of what it's like to produce no offense at all and get your asses thoroughly beat on a field for 90 minutes. Hopefully that's not something that is going to stick with the team and not something that he'll say, oh, this is what every road game is going to be like then, because that was not good. But it does seem like he's progressing nicely, and it does seem like if he's not going to start necessarily on the 20th, barring any sort of, God forbid, setback injury, anything like that, it seems like he will get a good dose of minutes. Maybe as a second half sub, maybe around like minute 60, see what he can do, but definitely encouraging. One of the two best players you figure that he's got on the team right now. So I can imagine that Wolff is happy. That's the situation he's in. So again, he's been without a DP winger since May, and we all know what Rigoni didn't do in his time here. Hopefully this works out better.
Narrative-wise, the thing that I think the fan base wants to see is they want to see Bukari start that game, and they want something akin to the FC Cincinnati 5-0 blowout that starts early and often, completely wild. People who weren't planning to go to the game going, what's on SeatGeek? And show up for the second half because they don't want to miss the game that they are watching on their phones as they're figuring out parking and getting over to the stadium. That's what I think the fan base wants to see more than anything, is instant change in the complexion of the face of this team and validation of the Austin project that Rodolfo Borrell has been describing since he came in last summer, of wanting to transform this club.
Do we think it's going to be that immediate or dramatic though?
Do I think? I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it. Do I think it's possible?
Mhm.
Absolutely. Because of the quality of form that Bukari has. He didn't just take this job for the paycheck, though the paycheck's nice. He
Mhm.
took this job to really shine in a place other than Europe where, no offense to his former club, but a new challenge, a new operation, a place to really show off and shine the way that his national teammate Joseph Paintsil has on LA Galaxy. There could be far worse things, Phil, in MLS than suddenly a takeover by a bunch of incredibly talented Ghanaian players.
Yeah.
I want to see more of these AFCON players in MLS because their style of play is what MLS fans and US based soccer fans want to see more of. And these guys really put the gas in the tank.
Yeah, it does happen. There is definitely a pipeline. There's the whole Right to Dream project in Ghana. So that's brought some players over. And again, just thinking about MLS and where it fits into the global network of soccer. Is it college football to Europe's NFL? Could be that seems to be something that's happening to some degree, but with Messi and the Messi effect and all that, MLS can be maybe something entirely different and can also be a place where you have some players that still have a great deal of talent and who could do well in Europe. Actually think that, yeah, maybe playing in the US and Canada is better. Let's go ahead. I want to talk a little bit also about the Sounders match coming up. Of course, that is Saturday. That's at Q2. They played once before. If you've forgotten about it, that's because you have blocked it out of your mind. It was a March game. It was a 0-0 draw. Austin did not produce much offense. So I think there were 2 shots and 1 shot on goal, I want to say. And the on goal quality of that was questionable. I believe that was a Valencia shot that was a 1% XG chance
Yes, I
or
believe
something along
so.
those lines. Yeah, it was a game where basically Austin did a lot of defending. Seattle came with a lot of shots, but they were able to hold on for the draw. Scoreless draw, obviously, certainly encouraging in some sense, but in terms of murdering good fun soccer for the night, also something that they did. So I think it's going to be better this time out. I'm doing a 3 questions exchange with Dave Clark from Sounder at Heart right now, and
Nice.
he was just asking about the home road split in terms of goal scoring and all that, and so got into some of the dire numbers that I got into earlier this week with the article that you may have seen. Again, obviously at home they harness that crowd energy, and they certainly, again, we saw another weapon maybe emerge in Zardes. Maybe he's in good goal scoring form now. Maybe this is something that is going to be part of a trend rather than just a 1 game blip. So we didn't really get much in the way of details though about game preparations, right? So we just got
Right.
the usual standard stuff from Josh about
We're just
them being a
focused
good
on the next
team, and
game and
yeah,
never count them out.
and not looking ahead to Dallas.
Yeah, no, not looking at Dallas. What? That's next week? Oh, yeah, I guess. Now that you mention it, gee. The other thing that I wanted to mention about Seattle was I watched their Open Cup game against Sacramento on
Oh,
Tuesday,
nice. Okay.
and Rui Diaz and Roldan in particular went real hard all the way through, and Seattle won that, but it it took a lot of energy and a lot of effort. Sacramento always comes hard in Open Cup games,
Mhm.
and in recent years they have been real solid contenders, and this year
Mhm.
was no different. Talk to any of the players, any of the coaches, Josh in particular. Oh, a few days rest. They're just like us. And okay, yes, everyone's invincible, and everyone just needs one night to go to sleep. But going that hard, going like
Mhm.
digging and grinding that hard, the way that I saw those Sounders starters going on Tuesday night, I
Mhm.
think that gives some favor to there being a possibility of Austin getting a result at home against this Sounders squad. As good as they are, as much as they always get better as the season progresses, as Josh said, yeah, who cares? These guys are worn out from a really quarterfinal, and would they
Against
like
a
to
team that hates MLS.
gives you like all of the USL guff that the USL teams do when they get to play an MLS side. I feel like that game went about as well as Austin could hope, similarly
Mhm.
to how the SKC Dallas game went on the heels of
Oh, yeah.
SKC and Dallas playing each other in league play last weekend. They played each other Wednesday. What was it, like 4.5 hour rain delay or something like that? Or no,
Yeah.
4.5 hours after the original kickoff is when they started the second half or something like that. It was absurd. It was about as long of a weather delay as they could have had. And then it went to extra time. And it just, that is precisely as worn out as you want Frisco to be in advance of playing Carson, LA Galaxy at home before playing Austin on a Wednesday. So the progression of playing both of these Open Cup quarterfinal teams who are coming off of really punishing Open Cup rounds of their own, I think is making things look as optimistic as one could hope from the perspective of the other teams really being worn the hell out. Dallas dealing with a lot of injuries, just watching them have to suffer that badly, staying in Kansas City for 2 games straight against Vermee's squad. I got to say, like, folks who want Austin to win should feel good about the general state of readiness of both those teams.
Yeah. And again, I think obviously long games at this stage, that's good. And again, yeah, also it's a week in which nobody really cares about the Open Cup, and yet they had quarterfinal matches. I think only like the true sickos probably get up for those games, given that there was so much Euros and Copa America stuff that's happening as well. How are the crowds in those?
Kansas City looked real empty. A pretty respectable crowd for the Sacramento game against Seattle, but
it was there. It was in Sacramento, right?
Yeah, it was in Sacramento. The Kansas City game in Kansas City, same stadium as it was on the weekend. It was so empty before the weather delay that you could see the vast majority of the letters of Sporting across the stands. And that was before tons and tons of people left. Relative tons of people, of the dozens that showed up for that midweek Open Cup game. Yeah, I am optimistic about the future of Open Cup because Apple picked up the remainder of those broadcast rights, which I remembered noticing when it happened, and then I forgot about it until I realized, oh wow, these games are not on YouTube or Barstool Sports or whatever.
And then the first of those, Indy 11 knocked off Atlanta United. So
yeah.
Here's our showcase. Here's MLS on the MLS channel, and here's USL.
Here's the reason I'm optimistic about it is Apple made the decision to pick up those rights. That was not MLS's decision. And that means that the people steering that relationship at Apple, if they believed that the Open Cup was garbage and the Open Cup should just burn in a fire and die like Garber seems to want, I don't think Apple would have picked up those rights. I think that may have been something that could have been taken as a statement of the way that Apple sees the value of Open Cup. And if Apple is investing in it, guess what? MLS gets to care about it because Apple is the one backing up the giant truck of money.
There are still things from like a TV standpoint, from a logistics standpoint, that still need to be fixed about Open Cup. Obviously, its importance as a tournament, we know this. It's obviously something that for kind of the good of American soccer needs to continue. But in terms of being a product where you're citing this Dallas Kansas City game, which sounds absolutely miserable, which I did not watch. And you've got these quarterfinal matches, which again, like on a different week, maybe that gets people in and curious, but nobody's got the bandwidth for that this week. There have been some absolutely bonkers Copa America matches that have happened. And, you know, you're getting people on the backside of watching Euro matches earlier in the day. So to suddenly go and care about this tournament, USL teams filtered in there, and with the scheduling, unfortunately, you get SKC and Dallas, you get a repeat of what happened a few days before. That's not good. No one wants that.
No. I mean, when you look at it, the value of Open Cup is in Open Cup being elevated to being something that matters. And to your point, as people are binging their faces off of these incredible Copa America and Euros matches, some of them incredible, some of them struggle fests. But you take the week in which that Colombia-Uruguay game happened, and you go, also, within the same 7 days, Dallas will play Kansas City twice. It's not very compelling, unfortunately. It's not the ideal platform for this kind of thing. If Open Cup were something that shifted to a calendar that favored the earlier part of the season and didn't come
Mhm.
in the middle of all of the super sexy, cool international cup competitions in the summer because of when the international seasons actually take place, maybe things would be better. I feel if Apple looks at doing the investing part of actually televising the entire tournament and making it easily and readily available to folks, from doing Next Pro televised matches, they're used to the lower budget, lower infrastructure available of using smaller stadiums and doing bare bones stuff. And you've got an announcer and a camera guy, and you're it. That's it. You're good. If they have figured out a way to make that, work, what, the craziest thing in the world to some people would be if Apple picked up those rights and made the entire Open Cup tournament completely free to watch. And what would that do
Yeah.
for US soccer? It would allow the US's longest running cup competition to be viewable by everyone in the world completely free
Mhm.
of charge.
Right. Yeah, and do it in a way, because that's the thing. Because there were some early Open Cup matches that were interesting, and everybody likes to see the cup sets and those sorts of things. But those games were impossible to find. I think those were
Yeah.
just streamed on YouTube, and it took some real doing to be able to get those matches and then to be able to watch those matches and Chromecasting and all that sort of thing. It's just, yeah, it can be done, but why are you making this so much more
Mm-hmm.
difficult than it has to be? Especially you have those games that are running up against CONCACAF Champions League. And again, that's going to get expanded. That's a problem. Leagues Cup, we're going to get into obviously talking about that. I know that there are a lot of people resistant to Leagues Cup, but last year, those games were spectacles. They were great. It was really fun TV. It wasn't ideal in terms of, oh, we're going to, take this chunk of the season and splinter it off and drop this month-long tournament into it. That's not necessarily great, although obviously Austin got a needed break, although maybe fans would have found it more satisfying if they were playing more
Yeah.
than 2 games in there. But it's the calendar is just getting so cluttered right now, and I understand Garber's impulses to want to just keep MLS teams out of US Open Cup to make sure that the calendar is not so cluttered. That's the solution. But I think there's ways where it could be done. I don't know. We're not going to fix Open Cup right now.
No.
We're to put that on Zardas's list. We're
Yeah.
going to get
Yeah.
Zardes to fix
There we
Open
go.
Cup
There we
unilaterally on
go.
his own. But there's got to be some sort of solution, yeah, that is Apple TV driven, that does something to get those kind of smaller represented communities. Again, you've got your USLC, League One, League Two teams that are like the Vermont Green. They're really cool. I want to be able to see that with minimal effort compared
Mm-hmm.
to what people had to go through this year. Like,
Think
I'm
about it.
curious
Like,
about teams like that.
the highlights in those cup set matches, you want the editing skills that, frankly, the Apple
Mhm.
MLS Season Pass folks have done a great job with those highlight reels and those real banger moments from different games and
Yep.
highlighting the particular language commentary that really sells the moments as big moments. You just need to put more grist in that mill. And the Open Cup, I think, is a
Mhm.
great opportunity for that, because the crazy cup sets are those things that are like San Francisco burrito joint named team
Yep.
absolutely kills it against this other team. You want to see those moments. And those are the kinds of things that spread the gospel of, yes, there is great soccer being played in the United States to the four winds. But yeah,
Yeah, do some content around that too. Yeah, take me to that burrito place in San Francisco and
yes,
show off that US Open Cup trophy that they have. And yeah, take me to Vermont and take me to Chattanooga and take me to all these places where you have these teams and you have these really energized fan bases that are truly keeping it local, because it's hard to get to see an MLS team. So they are really embracing
Mm.
whatever league has deemed their locale worthy of placing a team. So I think that, yeah, if we got a little bit more of that and understood more of the pyramid and more of the kind of character of those individual teams and their fans, that people care about it a lot more.
and there really is, the thing that I think people miss is that there is some really solid content along those lines that they produce for the MLS Next Pro clubs, especially now that they've got
Mhm.
Next Pro
Yep.
clubs that do not have a feeder into an MLS club, Chattanooga and
Right.
Carolina Core. I think it's really fascinating what they have figured out to do with minimal resources and some incredibly talented on-screen hosts in Michelle Montaigne and Samara Perez, who
Mhm.
know their stuff and know what they're doing and are doing it better than big multi-sport networks that are in the process of dying and fighting for the hard scrabble rights that are left. I know loads of people who watch Welcome to Wrexham and do not care about soccer at all, but they care about that. And
Mhm.
maybe they're a little soccer curious and they're thinking about going to an Austin FC game for the first time because they watch the Always Sunny in Philadelphia and Deadpool guys running a club in Wales. Welcome to Wrexham. Let season pass, let Apple's soccer coverage say welcome to US soccer and all of these great things that are happening rather than, you know what, we need Kansas City and Dallas to play each other a third time inside of 8 days. We need to find a reason for that to happen. Schedule congestion is something that we talked to Ethan Finley a few weeks ago, and I dropped to him that allegedly the plan is to still play Leagues Cup the same year as the World Cup, and his eyes bugged out a bit. And his response, and the response of a lot of folks, I think, is that it's not that the idea of Leagues Cup is a bad one and that people want Leagues Cup to just disappear. It's that there's got to be a better balance for things. There's got to be some give and take, not just take. And there are a lot of people who are putting their hatred of Leagues Cup as the acting out of how they feel about MLS trying to stomp out Open Cup. And if Apple is coming in as something of a peace negotiator in trying to make everything work out, which is all for the better, then great. But yeah, we could talk about sports rights and where allegedly the EFL rights are landing, which I'm hearing is probably going to be CBS, but
Mm.
that deal still hasn't closed yet, which would mean that everything but the Premier League would be all on Paramount Plus all of a sudden, which would
Ooh,
be so
okay.
much easier than the 3 different places that they are. But yeah, there's so much soccer out there. It would be great for it to be more readily accessible and also not competing with itself in places in the calendar when it could avoid that.
So Zardes, please go fix that.
Yes. Chief negotiator Gyasi Zardes.
And then also, in case you didn't catch that, Moises had some thinly veiled barbs at France and Fox.
I don't know what you could mean. I don't
Yeah.
know what you could possibly mean by that.
When you mentioned struggle ball, were you not thinking a little bit of,
I would never cast such aspersions at Les Bleus, my beloved.
do you remember how
France.
happy we were just last week?
I was overjoyed. I was thrilled. I was in such a great place.
Me too.
And now England's in the final. But the less said about
France
that,
had
the
to go
better.
play more games.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why'd you have to do that, France? And yes, now England and Spain is in the finals. I don't remember the tweet I saw, but somebody talked about, I don't want those colonizers to win. Go Spain.
Yeah, I don't want the colonizers to win. Meanwhile, every nation in the final four, all of them were imperial colonial powers. It's
So, I mean,
heroes.
what are the odds?
What are the odds?
But we do have Protestants against Catholics, though, which is nice to see.
There you go.
All
At
right.
least one tradition is holding.
So anything else that we want to say about Seattle and Dallas? Oh, I did want to mention with Seattle, Pedro de la Vega, who you might have remembered, awesome new player that Seattle was getting. I believe he's young designated player status. I believe he hurt himself against Austin, but looks like he's being worked back in. He may see about maybe a half hour or 45 minutes. He might see like a full rollout in the second half in the game on Saturday. So curious to see him and what he'll do. Because again, he is on the other side. You're going to be rooting against him, but he's also a pretty exciting player that, again, has a lot of billing to live up to, and curious to see how he'll do. This season has so far been a wash for him, but this is a chance to get back on it and to begin learning a little bit more about the league. So be very curious about that. And then Dallas, again, it's one game at a time. So we didn't really get anything at all from the press conference. But again, you've been running the Copa Tejas numbers.
A win or a draw, Austin takes the Copa. Unless there's something real weird with goal differential, I think was the thing.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, for Austin to really win it, they're going to need to have an outright 3-point win away at Frisco for it to feel
Yeah.
good for people. This is a
Mhm.
feel good vibes cup. We've
Wasn't last
discussed-
year.
it is now. Okay. We've decided it's a feel good vibes cup now.
We wanted it to be last year, but it
yeah.
certainly wasn't last year.
The feel good vibes in the fan base is that all the Frisco fans felt like last year Austin taking it delegitimized it. And so the Austin fans
Mhm.
doubled and tripled down on what a decisive, perfect, legendary win it was just to rub it in their faces. But yeah,
Right. We
Kopitar's
lost
math.
1-0 to Colorado, and
Uh-huh.
Will Bruin missed a sitter. And that very night, Dallas and Houston tied. Austin are your Kopitar champions. Woo!
Yeah. For it to re-legitimize Kopitar a bit, it needs to be a proper standing up win for Austin.
That would be best for that trophy.
It really would. Memes and posts being what they are, that's all fine and dandy. But to do it for real, that's what Copa Tejas itself needs, not even to speak to what the fan base needs.
Do we have anything else that we want to talk about on either of those games, or should we move into Berhalter territory?
I feel like the fallen boughs of the Berhalter tree are the place to go.
Okay. So, as you may be aware, of course you are, US crashed out of Copa America, failed to get out of the group stage, seen as a failure.
First ever host nation to do that, you should mention.
Oh, okay.
Good
Right.
on the US
Perfect.
making
Even better.
history.
Berhalter exits as a result of that. Maybe not the best reason in and of itself to sack a manager, but again, just thinking about the World Cup performance and then the weird hiatus that the scandal with the Reynas brought about, and then him coming back and yada yada, Nations League, Copa America, all that. So yeah, the idea here is let's get a fresh start to happen. And of course, because it was topical and because, Berhalter is sort of Wolff's mentor. It's pretty interesting that, again, the question from like a TV reporter straight out of the gate about Berhalter was predictable, but I thought he said some really interesting stuff in there. So I thought his answer was indicative. You had referred earlier to his bad acting and his sour face. So certainly I think when he came up, Josh was less than thrilled. That was a topic.
Not his
but then,
favorite thing to discuss, it seemed.
No.
Yeah.
But he talked about, first of all, just gave a commensurate, speaks for itself. Soccer's growing in this country and results are quite important, which is a line that my wife flagged. She looked at the article and she doesn't always read my articles. She's not the biggest soccer fan, but she thought that was a telling comment to make about the kind of results driven evaluation of coaches, right? And then said direction is also part of that, but you leave it up to those people to make those decisions. And obviously we'll see where it goes from here. And then you asked about possibly facing Berhalter and MLS down the line, which I thought was the follow-up that needed to happen. And he went ahead and said, I have nothing but respect for Gregg. I think he is one of the very best people I've been around, coaches I've been around, minds I've been around, so he'll land somewhere. I'm not sure if it's in MLS, but he's a highly qualified coach, so he'll be just fine. So any thoughts about that? Because all of a sudden, that's pretty interesting, right?
Yeah.
So that we have, again, this is a coach that his playing style and his results and the frustrations that fans have with him as a coach might remind you in certain ways of Josh Wolff. And then also, I did an article for a publication called Splinter where I was writing it, basically drafting it on the day that US Soccer was ramping up to fire Berhalter, so I had to do some rewrites after that. But looking at Jesse Marsch and what could have been, right? So obviously, very different playing style, much more kind of pragmatic, much more kind of Red Bull infused. And of course, his villain origin story had him going to coach Canada, as ugly as a group stage as the US had, maybe even arguably uglier, but they did get out of the group and then had a really phenomenal match against Venezuela that was fun to watch, that I got to watch with my mom and my brother and really became a fan. And the F-bombs that I let out in front of my mom at certain points of that match, embarrassing, but also, embrace the real me. And then obviously the 2-0 bookend loss against Argentina to close things out, but still Canada gets to semifinals. The US does not. The US does not even get to the quarterfinals. So any just thoughts in terms of all of that kind of tumult in the news and what it says about US soccer and Austin FC and fandom and
the reactions from Josh, I there's only so much that I think you can affect building a rapport with the guy, because he's very resistant to that sort of thing, unless your name is Phil West and he always wants to hear from you first, even if he makes you give the stank face. A thing that I noted is that he enjoys talking about international competitions, and he's watching other stuff. And so when I asked him to chime in on Copa and the Euros, I name checked him as international soccer tournament correspondent Josh Wolff, because his punditry about this stuff, it has been interesting. Last week,
Mhm.
he said, I mean, I want to, whether he meant it this way or not, if I'm just imagining it, I really enjoyed him saying, well, they went out and showed everyone who they are about the U.S. team against Uruguay.
Yeah, they
And that
did.
to me felt like come on, guys. You're better than this. You could have done better than this. What happened? Oh my God. And very carefully, he was stating the truth. He wasn't insulting anybody, but
Mhm.
he was giving his honest assessment that they sure showed who they were. You
Right.
combine that with this week's response to the results oriented play and his respect for Gregg. Like, he's not going to say, look, you guys know Gregg's my friend. Don't tell anybody. But he fumbled this whole national team thing. And I have notes. He was never going to say anything like that.
Of course.
But the area for interpretation that he leaves open, to not mincing words so much as carefully deploying the words on the plate while not giving
Mhm.
us the steak, to continue my fraught cooking metaphor issue.
David
uh,
Chang.
there you go. To me, this kind of lays out that it's not that Josh is completely unaware that maybe there have been issues with results, and that things are turning and hinging much more directly on results, and that maybe it does behoove him to get things back to where they were in 2022, overperforming as it may have been. I would love nothing more for him as a person, completely divorced from my personal feelings about him or his coaching style, than if he were to see the situation he's in at his club currently, and the visible stink on Berhalter coming out of the men's national team, as a real opportunity to take take on some of the ratatouilleing that Chef Burrell has been doing allegedly, where we
Right.
have seen some starkly different playing styles and tactics than we have gotten incredibly used to over the last couple of years emerge, where occasionally, weird, it's like with this change of tactics, and you let Danny Pereira serve more of an attacking purpose, and he's a whole lot more useful. Weird how that happens. Strange. Huh. My hope is that what I'm reading into all this is that for as long as he continues to be at the club, that there is some interest in just trying new things and not sticking to the exact same Berhalterian template, that it is hopefully finally, people still think that somehow Anthony Precourt is looking to replace Josh Wolff with Gregg Berhalter at Austin, despite what I'm sure would be violent protestations from the sporting director he just spent a gigantic amount of money hiring. That the mental state of folks is such that people think that is a possibility, is a big reason why this club is needing the kind of turnaround that we are all hoping to see, because it's so much more interesting than a totally cursed team that is fated to do nothing very good. This is all a long, rambling, almost like therapy trauma dump of saying that, see in the margins in which he actually gives us insight into where his head's at,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
he is thinking about a lot of this stuff. He showed up to work early one morning. To me, that it bothers him is a difference between him and Berhalter, who
Mhm.
does not allow himself to be bothered by negative results. The negative results are other people, probably the players' faults, period.
Mhm.
And he will sleep well every single night as the God created king of all soccer. I have seen indications from Josh in these past months that is not the way that his head works. And whatever he may outwardly project, that there is room for learning, there is room for humility in there, even
Mhm.
though he will say infuriating things in press
Mhm.
conferences about not needing to win, or, well, if the players had just done this right, or if this player had done this right, refusing to share in the blame. Yes, that is all there, but he is revealing things in these little cracks that make me think that he's not a completely lost cause necessarily, but there's
Right.
a lot that he's got to show to prove that to be the case.
But he's still so measured and hyper cerebral that I
Yeah.
think he rubs people the same way that Berhalter does. That there's this kind of approach, is this not too high, not too low? Yeah, certainly there is this kind of capacity to be upset, but there's just never really that kind of demonstration about it, even if it is something where it might be cathartic for him, for the players, for the fan base, things like that. He's not that kind of coach. And I think a lot of this has to do with, obviously, Wolff studied under Berhalter. He was assistant coach for him at the Crew and then followed him over to the US national team. And that's where Josh was at the time that he decided to take this head coaching job, because it was an opportunity to be a head coach with an owner that he was familiar with, having been hired by Berhalter and Precourt at Columbus before that. So I do, and again, yeah, we're talking about this, Berhalter doesn't get the results that people were hoping for. He loses his job this year. Nico Estevez doesn't get the results of Dallas that people are hoping for. He's gone. Luchi Gonzalez, San Jose, same thing, right? Of those four coaches that are all together, Josh is last man standing. And it's got to occur to him to a certain degree, a little bit at least, that, oh, if I'm not getting the results, then I'm not going to necessarily be able to stay here forever either.
Yeah.
And I think part of it might be, hey, I like Austin. I like this team. I like this culture. I like Precourt as an owner. I want to stay here. Like, things really have to happen. And I think, that in his pragmatic approach, you see this kind of calculation of 2 points at home, 1 point at the road, and that's going to be the formula to get into the playoffs, and that's the goal, and we're just waiting for some better players. And I think a lot of that is true, but then how it translates on the field, it's, well, and going back to Copa Tejas and that first year where Austin took a bunch of fans on the road, and Austin played a rotated lineup against Dallas and Frisco, and people were very, very upset. But that was a calculation based on what the season needed. So again, there's this kind of, I think, from Josh, if he thinks something is going to be in the best interest of the team long term, not necessarily just for that one game, he's not necessarily going to care about the optics. And I think that while that's pragmatic, and that's probably ultimately what his job is, to think about the big picture, to think about the long term, that can be incredibly dissatisfying for fans, especially when he turns around and says, oh yeah, it's on the players. Like, they need to execute, and to not take that occasional accountability and say, yeah, it's on me, we need to do better. Again, like, we've been talking about this a bit in the podcastosphere, and Zach from the North End brought up that, yeah, the game against Violette in the Dominican Republic, which was an unmitigated disaster, was really the only time that Josh had revealed, again, this kind of culpability, this kind of idea that, yeah, I didn't have the team prepared. Oh, and I have a little bit of a ramble now, and I want to get you back into this, but I do also, before I forget it, I want to talk about correspondent Josh Wolff. One of the things that tickled me the most, and this was in last week's press conference, was that he talked about like how great Brazil and Colombia was. I was like, well, certainly you had a split screen to watch Julio in Costa Rica too. No, I was following on my phone, but no, I was locked into the good game. He all but said, so he didn't say those words, but the implication was, yeah, I wasn't going to bother with split screens. I was just watching the good game, and I made the right choice.
I feel like that it's another thing of, okay, be a human being for 5 minutes, Josh, and it gives people a little bit more perspective into you as an actual person, and not just a delivery method for a Burr philosophy of things. I feel like did you watch that All or Nothing season about Arsenal, about the big comeback season after the not great
No, it's
season?
on my list.
It's really good.
There's so many things I should watch that I have not.
The reason I bring it up is that you talk about the soccer heredity tree, Berhalter and Nico and these guys that worked under him, and you look at Pep's operation, and you had both Rodolfo Borrell and Mikel Arteta as assistant coaches under him, and
right, yeah,
they have their different paths. And you look at Arteta for Arsenal, whether you're an Arsenal fan like Phil and I are or not, no accounting for taste, okay?
The rest of the world, but go on.
Yeah, the thing that you see watching that exhaustive behind the scenes thing, where you're getting more access to that coach and that club and those players than we have ever seen from this club. The closest was, after Gite scored that hat trick, we got a little bit of locker room stuff that wasn't just, hey, I love you guys and thank you for the game ball kind of stuff that we've seen in other locker room clips,
Mhm.
where we got to see Josh talking about personal stuff that the player was going through. And you get more perspective like that. People make assumptions, and there are some people that definitely know more about the direct inner workings of the club because they're friends with this player or that player's relative or something like that. Or they run in this circle or that circle and they know this assistant coach or this trainer or something like that. Sure. But the more that the fan base that at large actually has access to seeing that kind of stuff, that's the only way that we know what's actually going on in those relationships, in that locker room with those players.
Mhm.
They're very careful about when they let us come back at St. David's Performance Center. It felt like this one time we were brought back a little bit early, with the intention of letting us see how, everybody gets along and the players aren't just shunning Josh and, he hasn't lost the locker room and everybody's having a good old time and just kicking it around. And other times that they wait until literally everyone is back in the locker room before they bring us back, whether it's because they don't want us to see that a new player is up or what second team players were training with them that day or who might be in as a trialist or something like that. They're very controlling about the way that they frame that stuff and what they let us
Yep.
see. And it's again, in the margins of what they don't intend to let us see behind the curtain, although watching us like hawks at all times. But seeing the way in particular that watching Josh interact with Alonso Ramirez, CJ Fodre, some of the other second team players, those are glimpses of things that the greater public does not see. It is not part of the official record that gets out there. And is there probably still a fair amount of repair that needs to happen between the coach and the relationship with some of these players who have rubbed up against him the wrong way in different ways? Probably, but there are always going to be young players who don't think they're being played correctly or being given enough minutes or being allowed to do what they want to do because they're 22 years old and they know everything. And more of that kind of acting out with the next pro players because they're still in that developmental stage and getting worked into being part of a team unit and not just wearing their emotions on their sleeves, which is part of where the second team has run into card accumulation problems this year.
Yeah. You saw that. You saw that in Houston.
I saw that vividly last night in Houston. Diego Abarca, at the last minute of stoppage, almost starting a fight with a Houston 2 player, and Sal Mazzaferro sailing over like Superman, saying, hey, you saw what happened to Deonda. Deonda, number 25, got a straight red for a really dumb tackle that his coach told me straight up. I said, was that bad luck? Was it bad decision making? Was that emotional control? And he said, no, it was straight up emotional control. He knew better. He made a bad decision in the moment. And that's the kind of thing that these players have to learn to get past. You see some of that in visible reactions from first team players on the field when games are not going their way. And there's a lot of reading of tea leaves that happens of, oh, he wouldn't be so upset if Josh were just allowing him to run the way that he wants to. Sometimes maybe the players are just upset that the results are not coming and the other team is defending incredibly well or marking the right guys in frustrating ways because everything is so black box when it comes to tactics. Unless we luck out and we get a player who just wants to spill the beans, Ethan Finley, not mentioning any names, Ethan Finley, in the post match, who decides to go, oh, yeah, so we prepped for this and they fell right into our trap and they did this and they did this. We don't get that insight. And it's one of the most frustrating things for me. This is something that you have gone through in this sport, in this industry, much longer than I have, and is certainly not news to you. That's one of the most frustrating things about covering this team is, man, I would love to dig into some of those stories, but they are so tight on secrecy above all that you just don't get that kind of insight. And that's the most frustrating thing. Following the club, being a fan of the club, just studying the club at all because everything is so intensely locked off.
Yep. So again, just thinking about the saga and how this goes, I think we'll really see like what the standard truly is, right? Like if there is belief in Wolff and they do make the playoffs, even if it is nominally, even if it is ninth place, and a top 3 West team gets them pretty early.
Hey, maybe Cherundolo isn't coaching LAFC anymore, and Austin lucks out in a first-round bout against a top-seeded LAFC. Who knows?
I actually had a fleeting thought about, would Wolff's system work better with LAFC's players, and would there be an opportunity to find that out if Cherundolo gets hired as the next US soccer coach? Does LAFC swoop in and take Wolff? And then I don't think this would happen necessarily, but I am just curious.
Is there a way that Austin fans who hate Josh Wolff could hate him even more by him turning traitor and coaching the black and gold
to an MLS Cup in
Yeah.
2024?
Yeah.
All right, we got to go here in a sec, but we've got one more little piece of breaking news. Came to us from our friend Dave Clark over at Sounder at Heart. We were asking a little bit about Nuhu and Rudiaz and their dust up and their suspension from the team, and apparently everything's fine. But initially the thought was, Jordan Morris, he's played 180 minutes over the last 2 matches. Looks like Rudiaz is going to get some substantial minutes. He's hurt now. He's got a minor injury, so he's not going to start. So
that's what I was wondering about watching that Tuesday night game. I was like, I think Rudiaz is hurt. Could Rudiaz be hurt? Guess what? Turns out he's hurt.
So the player who might actually get some time, even though he hasn't scored since April, and he last logged time in June for the team, was hero of the early Austin FC offseason, Danny Musovski. We might actually get to see him in action at Q2 and
Austin legend.
What he can do. Yeah. He has scored before, back when he was at the LAFC, the aforementioned LAFC, in Q2 against Brad Stuvers. It is certainly possible that it happens again in this guise, but all of a sudden a little bit more kind of interesting dimension, something that again maybe helps Austin overall in terms of Seattle not having the layers of talent they have to pick from at striker, but also in terms of, wouldn't this be karmically weird? Creates this whole kind of new wrinkle.
At the same time, could it be that Seattle's coach is adopting a similar thing of, we need to rotate, we need to just not lose, it's fine if we drop a couple of points on the road to Austin, that's not going to hurt us that badly in the standings because they're in hell and we're doing marginally better than hell, and let's just not go too hard. And could it be that resource conservation mindset is something that ends up biting Seattle in the ass? Maybe. Who knows?
Maybe. We'll see. That's why they play the games. And again, looking forward to being back in the stadium on Saturday. And then, of course, next week when we return, we'll know how those 2 matches went. Those will be the last matches that Austin plays, minus their 3 summer transfer window signings. After that, of course, they'll be eligible, and obviously a lot of the energy next week is going to be geared towards thinking about how they might do and thinking about how Austin might do to close out the season. Moises, do you have anything else that you want to jump in and add before we...
I'm going to be going to Frisco as press, not an attendee for the first time. Hope that I survive the experience, everybody.
Yeah, their press box is not a lot of fun. It's
we know
the stadium's like.
The theme of the week, Phil, the bar is in hell.
And I will be, it's birthday season. I have a child with a birthday. I will be watching the game through candles in a cake. Is how that's going to go. So not making the trip to Frisco, but of course I will be at Q2 for the next 2 home matches. The one that I am marginally excited about, to be honest, for Saturday. And then of course the debut of Bukari, we hope, and Dessler, we hope, and all the fun things that might happen in that following Saturday.
Yeah. Will Austin steal the crown from Queen Charlotte?
Stay tuned.
Where's Phil? He usually starts this off.
He's teaching in San Antonio today. Colby, go ahead and start us off.